A black woman gently pushed a stranger's wheelchair through airport security without hesitation. Moments later, he looked up, smiled, and asked her to travel the world by his side. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The Atlanta airport buzzed with the relentless energy of thousands of travelers rushing in different directions, each person locked in their own journey, their own story. Amara Lewis stood in line at the security checkpoint, her carry-on suitcase resting against her leg as she scrolled through emails on her phone. She had arrived 2 hours early for her flight to San Francisco, a habit her father had instilled in her from childhood. "The world doesn't care about your schedule," he would say, his voice still clear in her memory even 5 years after his passing. "Better to wait at the gate than watch your plane take off without you." At 34, Amara had built her life around structure and planning. As a corporate attorney specializing in international business law, she had mastered the art of anticipating complications before they arose. Her colleagues often joked that she could predict a contract dispute before the ink had dried on the signature line. This hyper-awareness had served her well professionally, propelling her to becoming the youngest partner at her firm. But in her personal life, it manifested as a cautious approach to relationships and experiences. Calculated risks were acceptable. Spontaneity was not. The line inched forward. Amara glanced at her watch, a vintage Cartier tank that had been her mother's, and noted she was still comfortably ahead of schedule. The conference in San Francisco wouldn't start until tomorrow afternoon, but she preferred arriving a day early to acclimate to the time change and review her presentation materials in peace. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind her, soft and tinged with apology. Amara turned to find a man in a wheelchair looking up at her. His face was handsome in a weathered way, with laugh lines around bright blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his tanned skin. She guessed he was in his mid-40s, though there was something youthful in his expression that made age difficult to determine. His legs were covered with a light blanket despite the airport's warmth, and a compact suitcase was balanced across his lap. "I hate to bother you," he continued, "but I was wondering if the line moves over there as well." He gestured toward another security lane with his chin. "I don't think that one's open yet," Amara replied, noting the absence of a TSA agent at the podium. "They usually open it when this gets too congested." "Thanks." He smiled, revealing slightly crooked teeth that somehow enhanced rather than detracted from his charm. "First time flying in?" He paused, seeming to calculate. "Well, in this condition anyway." Amara nodded politely and turned back to face forward, but found herself stealing glances at the man. There was something compelling about him that she couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the contrast between his physical limitation and the sense of energy that seemed to radiate from him. Or maybe it was the well-worn passport peeking out from the pocket of his shirt, suggesting a life of travel and adventure. 3 people ahead of her now. Amara tucked her phone into her blazer pocket and pulled out her ID and boarding pass. Behind her, she heard a soft grunt of effort and turned to see the man in the wheelchair struggling to retrieve his own documents while keeping his suitcase balanced. "Here, let me," she offered without thinking, holding out her hand. "Inside pocket of the backpack," he directed with a grateful nod toward the bag hanging from the back of his chair. Amara reached into the pocket he indicated and found his passport and a folded boarding pass. As she handed them to him, their fingers brushed briefly, and she noticed calluses that spoke of a life spent working with his hands. "James Thornton," he said, introducing himself as he accepted the documents. "Though most people call me Thorn." "Amara Lewis." "Pleasure to meet you, Amara. Where are you headed today?" "San Francisco. Business conference." "Ah, the city by the bay. Beautiful place." "And you?" she asked, finding herself curious despite her usual reserve with strangers. "Bali, eventually. After a quick stop in Dubai." Amara raised her eyebrows. "That's quite a journey." Thorne smiled, a flash of adventure lighting his eyes. The journey's the whole point." Before she could respond, the line moved forward, and it was Amara's turn at the security podium. She handed her documents to the TSA agent, who scrutinized her ID and boarding pass with practiced efficiency before nodding her through to the scanner area. Amara placed her carry-on on the conveyor belt, followed by her laptop bag and blazer. She slipped off her shoes and was about to walk through the body scanner when she noticed Thorn at the podium, explaining something to the agent. The agent was shaking his head, pointing to a sign, and Thorn's shoulders slumped slightly in frustration. Without thinking about it too deeply, Amara stepped out of line and walked back to the podium. "Is there a problem?" she asked, addressing both Thorn and the agent. "Sir needs assistance through security," the agent explained flatly. "Policy requires a same-gender TSA officer for pat-downs, and we're short-staffed at the moment. He'll need to wait." Thorn grimaced. "My connecting flight to Dubai is in an hour and a half. I was told the wheelchair service would be here to assist." The agent shrugged. "Not my department, sir." Amara felt a flare of indignation on Thorn's behalf. She recognized the bureaucratic disconnect all too well from her legal work, the perfect storm of policies created to protect but that often ended up creating unnecessary barriers instead. "I can help you through," she offered, looking directly at Thorn. "If that's all right." Relief washed over his face. "You don't mind? I don't want to make you miss your flight." "I've got time," she assured him, then turned to the agent. "Is that acceptable?" The agent seemed relieved to have a solution presented. "As long as you're willing, ma'am. He'll still need a pat-down by an officer once one becomes available, but you can help him with his belongings and the chair through the scanner." Amara nodded and moved behind Thorn's wheelchair. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," he replied with a wry smile. She guided his wheelchair to the security belt, where Thorn handed over his passport and boarding pass. Then, with practiced movements that suggested this wasn't his first time navigating such obstacles, he removed his laptop from his backpack and placed it in a bin. His movements were efficient, but limited by his seated position. "Do you need to take off your shoes?" Amara asked quietly. A shadow passed over Thorn's face. "No, They made an exception for that part." He patted his legs gently, and Amara understood. She nodded, not wanting to make him uncomfortable with unnecessary questions. Instead, she helped organize his belongings on the conveyor belt, and then positioned herself behind his wheelchair again. "They'll need to swab the chair," Thorn explained over his shoulder. "Standard procedure for metal objects that can't go through the scanner." A TSA officer approached with the explosive residue detector and ran it over various parts of the wheelchair while Amara waited patiently. Once cleared, she gently pushed Thorn through the wide, accessible gate beside the body scanner, hyper-aware of the line building behind them and the curious glances of other travelers. For his part, Thorn maintained a quiet dignity, thanking the officers as they directed Amara where to go. Once through the scanner area, they waited for his belongings to emerge from the X-ray machine. "Thank you," Thorn said softly. "Most people wouldn't bother." Amara retrieved his laptop and backpack, handing them to him before gathering her own things. "Most people are too caught up in their own concerns," she replied. "My dad used a wheelchair for the last 2 years of his life. I know how complicated simple tasks can become." Thorn studied her face with newfound interest. "I'm sorry about your father." "It was 5 years ago," she said, slipping her blazer back on. "Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, it was already stage 4. "That's a brutal one," Thorn said, genuine empathy in his voice. "My mother had breast cancer when I was in college. She survived, thankfully, but those were some dark days." Amara found herself nodding, surprised by how easily this conversation with a stranger had turned personal. A TSA officer finally approached, a middle-aged man with a kind expression. "I can take it from here, ma'am," he said to Amara, then addressed Thorn. "Sir, I need to conduct a standard pat-down inspection. Would you prefer a private screening room?" No need, Thorn replied easily. But could you wait just a moment? He turned back to Amara, who was gathering her carry-on. Which terminal are you headed to? T, she replied. Gate T14. A broad smile spread across Thorn's face. Well, that's a stroke of luck. I'm at T11. Mind if we head that way together after this formality is taken care of? I'd enjoy the company, and it seems the airport's wheelchair assistance is unreliable today. Amara hesitated. Her natural instinct was to politely decline, to retreat back into her bubble of solitude and preparation. She had planned to find a quiet corner in the terminal to review her presentation notes, but something about Thorn's open expression and the ease of their interaction so far made her reconsider. Sure, she heard herself say. I don't mind. The pat-down inspection took only a couple of minutes, and soon they were navigating the crowded concourse together, Amara pushing Thorn's wheelchair through the stream of hurried travelers. He was lighter than her father had been, she noticed, and his wheelchair was a sleek, ultralight model that responded easily to her guidance. So, Bali, she said as they rode the train between terminals. Vacation? Thorn's expression brightened. Photography assignment, actually. I'm documenting traditional healing practices across Southeast Asia for a cultural magazine. You're a photographer? Amara couldn't hide her surprise. Given his condition, she had assumed he might have a more stationary profession. He chuckled, clearly used to this reaction. For 23 years now. Started as a war correspondent in my 20s, then branched out to cultural and environmental stories. He patted his legs. These got damaged in Syria 7 months ago, IED on a road outside Damascus. But the camera still works, and so do my eyes and hands, which is all I really need. Amara absorbed this information, impressed by his matter-of-fact delivery and apparent lack of self-pity. That's quite a career. It's been a life, he agreed. Not always an easy one, but I wouldn't trade the experiences. He glanced up at her as they exited the train. And you? International business law sounds fascinating. It can be, Amara admitted, maneuvering his chair onto the moving walkway. Though less adventurous than photography, certainly. Mostly conference rooms and contract negotiations rather than exotic locations. Don't sell it short, Thorn countered. The law shapes societies in ways my photographs never could. You're building the frameworks that determine how people interact across borders. Amara hadn't thought of her work in such philosophical terms before, and she found herself warming to his perspective. As they continued toward their gates, their conversation flowed naturally from careers to favorite books to travel experiences. Thorn had visited 67 countries. Amara had been to 23, mostly for work. He told her about photographing Bengal tigers in India and interviewing shamans in Mongolia. She shared stories of negotiating deals in Tokyo and navigating the complexities of European Union regulations. Before she knew it, they had reached Gate T11, where Thorn's flight to Dubai was already in the pre-boarding phase. Perfect timing, he said, gesturing toward the gate. Looks like they're about to call priority boarding, which includes people who need additional time. He mimicked quotation marks with his fingers and rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Amara smiled. Well, it was nice talking with you. Safe travels to Bali. Thorn looked up at her, his expression suddenly serious. Amara, I know this is going to sound crazy, and please feel free to tell me I'm out of line, but… He took a deep breath. Would you like to have coffee sometime when you're back from San Francisco? Or dinner, perhaps? Amara blinked, taken aback by the unexpected invitation. In Atlanta, you mean? Well, that would be the logical place, since we both seem to live here, he said with a gentle smile. Unless you'd prefer somewhere else. I'm fairly mobile despite appearances, and I do have frequent flyer miles to burn. She found herself flustered, a rarity for someone who regularly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. I don't even know you, she said, immediately regretting how dismissive it sounded. But Thorne didn't seem offended. "That's generally the point of coffee or dinner, to get to know someone." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I've found that the most interesting people I've met in my life have been complete strangers initially." Before Amara could formulate a response, the gate agent announced priority boarding for the Dubai flight. Thorne glanced toward the gate, then back at her. "Think about it," he said, reaching into his backpack and producing a business card that he handed to her. "My email and phone are on there. My schedule is flexible after this assignment wraps up in 3 weeks." Amara accepted the card, noting the simple design. James Thornton, documentary photographer, along with his contact information and a small logo of a camera. "Now boarding all passengers requiring special assistance," the gate agent called. Thorne gave her one last smile. "That's my cue." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you again for your help, Amara. In a world where most people look away, you saw someone who needed assistance and stepped up without hesitation. That says a lot about who you are." With that, he released the brakes on his wheelchair and rolled himself toward the boarding lane, showing his boarding pass to the gate agent before disappearing down the jetway. Amara stood rooted to the spot, his business card still in her hand. A strange sensation had settled in her chest, a mixture of regret at their conversation being cut short and an unexpected excitement at the possibility of seeing him again. Shaking herself out of her momentary trance, she tucked the card into her pocket and continued to her own gate, suddenly less interested in reviewing her presentation than in replaying their conversation in her mind. As she settled into a seat at gate T14, she found herself wondering what Thorne was photographing in Bali and whether he would find the healing traditions he was seeking. 3 weeks after her San Francisco conference, Amara found herself sitting in an upscale Atlanta cafe, absently stirring her cappuccino as she checked her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She had arrived 15 minutes early, another habit inherited from her father, and now waited with a mixture of anticipation and self-doubt. She still wasn't entirely sure why she had texted Thorne the day after returning from her business trip. Something about him had lingered in her thoughts during her entire stay in San Francisco. While other conference attendees networked over cocktails, Amara had found herself scrolling through Thorne's photography website, marveling at his ability to capture humanity in its rawest forms: joy, suffering, resilience, wonder. His work was extraordinary. Images of refugee children playing soccer amid the ruins of their neighborhood in Aleppo, a weathered shaman in Mongolia silhouetted against a vast, empty sky, an elderly couple in Kyoto walking hand in hand beneath cherry blossoms. Each photograph told a story, invited questions, evoked emotions. Amara, whose life was defined by precision and control, found herself drawn to the messy, beautiful humanity on display. And so, against her usual cautious nature, she had texted him, "This is Amara from the airport. If your offer for coffee still stands, I'm back in Atlanta." His reply came within minutes. "It absolutely stands. Name the time and place." Now, as she waited for him to arrive, she wondered if she was making a mistake. What did she really know about this man? That he was a photographer who had been injured in Syria. That he had kind eyes and an easy smile. That he had somehow broken through her carefully constructed professional veneer during a brief interaction in an airport. The cafe door opened, drawing her attention. Thorne wheeled himself in, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. His face lit up with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Amara felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. He was dressed more casually than at the airport, in a Henley shirt the same blue as his eyes and dark jeans. His hair, which had been neatly combed before, was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. As he navigated between tables toward her, she noticed several patrons glancing his way, some with curiosity, others with the uncomfortable mixture of pity and avoidance that Amara had often observed directed at her father. "Amara," he greeted her warmly as he reached her table. "You look lovely. Thanks for suggesting this place. I've never been here before." "I hope it's all right. she said, suddenly conscious of her choice of venue. I didn't think about access. It's perfect, he assured her, maneuvering his chair into position across from her. Contrary to popular belief, most places in America are actually pretty accessible these days. One of the few advantages of being in this chair. I've gained a whole new appreciation for the ADA. His easy reference to his condition relaxed her slightly. How was Bali? She asked as he settled himself. Extraordinary. The healing traditions there are fascinating, a blend of animism, Hinduism, and indigenous practices that have survived centuries of colonization and globalization. His eyes lit up as he spoke, and Amara found herself captivated by his enthusiasm. I think I got some beautiful images, though I haven't had time to properly edit them all yet. A waiter approached, and Thorne ordered an Americano. After the waiter departed, he turned his full attention back to Amara. But enough about my work for now. How was your conference in San Francisco? Did your presentation go well? Amara was surprised he remembered. It did, actually. Better than expected. I was presenting on emerging trends in international intellectual property law, which sounds dry, but there were some interesting discussions about how different cultural perspectives on ownership impact global business. That doesn't sound dry at all, Thorne said, leaning forward slightly. It's about how ideas move across borders and how we value and protect creativity. That's fundamentally human. The waiter returned with Thorne's coffee, and they both thanked him before continuing their conversation. I looked at your website, Amara admitted. Your photographs are incredible. A hint of color touched Thorne's cheeks. Thank you. That means a lot. The series from Syria was haunting. Is that where you were injured? Thorne nodded, taking a sip of his coffee before responding. Yes, I was documenting the impact of the civil war on civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, water treatment facilities. Things that don't make headlines but devastate communities. He set down his cup and met her eyes directly. We were traveling between villages when our vehicle hit an IED. The driver was killed instantly. I was luckier. Spinal cord injury at T10. Means I have full function above the waist, partial sensation below, no movement in my legs. He delivered this clinical assessment of his condition with the same straightforward manner he'd shown at the airport, without self-pity or dramatization. I'm sorry, Amara said softly. Thorne shrugged. It's been an adjustment, certainly, but I'm still here, still working, still finding beauty in the world to photograph. He smiled again, that warm expression that seemed to transform his entire face. And still meeting fascinating people in airports. Amara felt herself blushing and quickly sipped her cappuccino to hide it. I'm hardly fascinating compared to shamans and war zones. I disagree, Thorne countered. Everyone has a story worth telling. What's yours, Amara Lewis? Beyond being a brilliant international attorney who helps strangers in airports? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Most of her first dates, not that this was a date, she quickly corrected herself, involved safe, surface-level exchanges, career achievements, recent vacations, benign observations about Atlanta traffic or weather. I'm not sure I know how to answer that, she admitted. Start anywhere, he suggested. What made you become a lawyer? Amara considered the question. The easy answer was ambition, or the practical career path after her political science degree, or the influence of her mother, who had been a civil rights attorney in the 1980s. But what came out instead surprised her. I believe in systems and structures, she said slowly, in rules that create order from chaos. The law fascinates me because it's humanity's attempt to codify morality and fairness to create frameworks for coexistence. She paused, wondering if she sounded pretentious, but Thorne was listening with genuine interest. International law is especially complex because it navigates between different cultural, political, and economic systems. Finding common ground, creating agreements that honor diverse perspectives while establishing clear expectations, there's something beautiful about that process. That's a far more philosophical answer than I wanted to make partner by 30, Thorne observed with a smile. Amara laughed. Well, there was that too. Did you? Make partner by 30? 32, she admitted. I missed my target by 2 years. A terrible failure, he teased, his eyes twinkling. Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from careers to childhood memories to favorite books. Thorne had grown up in rural Colorado, the son of a forest ranger and a high school English teacher. His mother's breast cancer diagnosis during his sophomore year of college had been a turning point, making him realize that life was too short to pursue anything but his passion. I dropped out of engineering school, bought a camera with my student loan money, and never looked back, he explained. My parents were surprisingly supportive, though I think my dad was disappointed I wouldn't be building bridges or skyscrapers. And now, how do they feel about your career choice? Proud, but perpetually worried. Mom collects every magazine I'm published in. Dad pretends he doesn't check the State Department travel advisories for every country I visit, but I know he does. Thorne's expression softened. They flew to Germany to be with me after the injury. Dad hasn't said I told you so yet, which shows remarkable restraint on his part. Amara smiled, though she felt a pang of sadness thinking of her own parents. That's lovely. They sound wonderful. They are. What about your parents? You mentioned your father passed away. Is your mother still living? No, Amara said quietly. She died when I was in law school. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. Thorne's face fell. I'm so sorry, Amara. To lose both parents so young. It's been challenging, she acknowledged, especially with no siblings. There's a strange kind of untethered feeling that comes with being the last of your immediate family. She had never articulated this feeling before, not even to her closest friends, and was surprised to find herself sharing it with Thorne now. But it's also made me self-reliant, independent, and perhaps a bit cautious about letting people in, he suggested gently. Amara met his perceptive gaze. Perhaps, she agreed softly. Their coffees had long gone cold, but neither seemed inclined to end the conversation. It wasn't until Amara's phone buzzed with a reminder about an afternoon client call that she realized they had been talking for nearly 2 hours. I'm afraid I have to get back to the office, she said reluctantly, gathering her purse. Of course. Thorne pulled out his wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover both their drinks, waving away her protest. Please, I insisted on this meeting. Next time can be your treat. Next time. The assumption lingered in the air between them, a question and an invitation. I'd like that, Amara found herself saying. Outside the cafe, the Atlanta summer heat hit them like a physical wall after the air-conditioned interior. Amara had walked from her office just 3 blocks away, but Thorne mentioned he had parked in the garage around the corner. Can I walk you to your car? She offered. I'd enjoy the company, he replied. As they moved down the sidewalk together, Amara matching her pace to his, she was acutely aware of the glances from passers-by. Some did a double take at the handsome man in the wheelchair, others seemed to be trying to determine their relationship. Thorne appeared oblivious to the attention, instead pointing out a striking piece of street art on the side of a building that Amara, despite passing it daily, had never really noticed. That's what I love about photography, he said as they paused to admire the mural. It trains you to really see the world around you, to notice the interplay of light and shadow, the expressions on people's faces, the stories embedded in everyday scenes. At the parking garage, they stopped at the entrance. A moment of awkwardness descended, the kind that often accompanies the end of a first meeting, the uncertainty of how to say goodbye, what it means, what comes next. I'm leaving for Japan next week, Thorne said. Another assignment for the Healing Traditions series. But I'll be back in Atlanta in about 10 days. Would you be interested in dinner then? Amara hesitated, but only briefly. I would, yes. Excellent. His smile was warm and genuine. I'll text you when I have a more specific return date." Then, with a graceful movement that spoke of months adapting to his new circumstances, he reached for her hand and gently squeezed it. His palm was warm and slightly calloused, the touch sending an unexpected current through her. "Thank you for today, Amara, for the conversation, and for seeing me, truly seeing me, not just the chair." Before she could respond, he released her hand and wheeled himself into the parking garage, leaving Amara standing on the sidewalk, watching him go, her hand still tingling from his touch and her mind already anticipating their next meeting. 10 days stretched into 2 weeks, and Amara found herself checking her phone more often than she cared to admit. Thorn had texted her twice from Japan, once a simple message saying he'd arrived safely, and later a stunning photograph of an elderly healer in Okinawa, her wizened hands preparing a traditional herbal remedy, golden afternoon light streaming through paper windows to illuminate her concentrated expression. "Thought you might appreciate this moment I captured today," his message read. "The wisdom in her hands reminds me of your description of your father." Amara had never told Thorn about her father's hands, how they had remained strong and expressive, even as the rest of his body failed him, how she had held them during their final conversation. She wondered what Thorn had seen in her that made him draw this connection, and the thought both unsettled and moved her. When his text finally came. "Back in Atlanta, jet-lagged but alive. Dinner tomorrow?" She felt a rush of anticipation that she immediately tried to temper. It was just dinner with an interesting person, she reminded herself. Nothing more. But as she stood before her closet the next evening, discarding one outfit after another, Amara was forced to admit that this dinner felt different from her usual professional or social engagements. She finally settled on a deep blue wrap dress that her best friend Layla had always insisted brought out the warm undertones in her dark skin. Thorn had suggested a restaurant in Inman Park, a converted Victorian home with a wraparound porch and an award-winning chef who specialized in reimagined Southern cuisine. When Amara arrived, the host led her to a table on the porch where Thorn was already waiting, dressed in a crisp white shirt that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. He looked up from the menu he was perusing, and his face transformed with a smile that made her heart skip in a way both thrilling and alarming. "Amara," he greeted her, wheeling back slightly from the table to offer his hand. "You look absolutely stunning." She took his hand, noticing how he held hers just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you. How was Japan?" "Fascinating, challenging, beautiful." He gestured for her to sit. "The healing traditions in Okinawa are particularly interesting. They have some of the highest rates of centenarians in the world, and they attribute it partly to their traditional medical practices and diet." "And are they right?" Amara asked, genuinely curious. "Probably partially. But I also observed a strong sense of community, purpose, and belonging among the elderly there. It made me think about how isolated many older people are in Western societies." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "Sorry, I'm diving into the deep end already, aren't I? How has your week been?" Amara smiled. "I don't mind the deep end, and my week has been hectic but productive. Closed a deal that's been in negotiations for months." "That calls for a celebration," Thorn decided, reaching for the wine list. "Red or white?" They settled on a bottle of Pinot Noir, and as they studied the menu, Thorn asked her questions about her work that revealed he had done some research on international law since their coffee meeting. His genuine interest in her field touched her. Too often, people's eyes glazed over when she discussed the intricacies of cross-border contracts or intellectual property disputes. After they ordered, scallops for her, short ribs for him, Thorn leaned forward slightly. "I have a confession to make." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Not at all," he assured her with a smile. "But I did look you up after our coffee. Your firm's website has quite an impressive bio for you. Harvard Law, youngest partner, specialization in East Asian markets. You're rather extraordinary, Amara Lewis." She felt a blush warming her cheeks. Now who's diving into the deep end? Guilty as charged. His blue eyes held hers. But life's too short for shallow waters, don't you think? The wine arrived, temporarily breaking the intensity of the moment. As the sommelier poured their glasses, Amara found herself studying Thorne's face, the laugh lines around his eyes, the slight silver threading at his temples, the scar just visible at his jawline. His was a face that had lived, experienced, suffered, and found joy despite it all. After the sommelier departed, Thorne raised his glass. To new connections. To new connections, Amara echoed, clinking her glass gently against his. Their conversation over dinner ranged widely, from Thorne's adventures in Japan to Amara's recent legal victory. He told her about photographing a 102-year-old herbalist who still climbed mountains to gather rare medicinal plants, and she shared the challenges of navigating cultural differences in business negotiations. The hardest part is helping clients understand that their normal way of doing business might be perceived completely differently in another country, she explained. Americans tend to value directness and efficiency, while in many East Asian contexts, relationship building and face-saving are paramount. Cultural translation, Thorne nodded. I encounter that constantly in my work, trying to convey the essence of one culture's practices to an audience rooted in entirely different assumptions and values. As they talked, Amara was struck by how comfortable she felt with him. Despite their different professions and experiences, they shared a fundamental curiosity about the world and a respect for diverse perspectives. And there was something else, a sense of safety in his presence, an absence of the performative dance that so often characterized her interactions with men interested in her romantically. When their main courses arrived, Thorne observed her appreciation of the beautifully plated scallops. You have an eye for aesthetics, he noted. I appreciate good design, she acknowledged, though I lack the ability to create it myself. I disagree, Thorne said. You create structure and clarity out of legal complexity. That's a form of design, different medium but the same fundamental goal, bringing order and meaning to chaos. Amara had never thought of her work that way and found herself touched by his perspective. As they continued their meal, she felt herself relaxing further, sharing stories she rarely revealed, about the panic attacks she'd experienced during her first year of law school, about her brief rebellion in college when she dyed her hair purple and joined a student protest movement, about the vintage car restoration hobby she'd inherited from her father. A 1967 Mustang? Thorne's eyes widened with appreciation. That's serious business. Do you work on it yourself? As much as I can, Amara said. I have a mechanic who helps with the more technical aspects, but the bodywork and interior, that's all me. It's therapeutic, using my hands instead of my brain after days of intellectual legal work. I'd love to see it sometime, Thorne said, then immediately added, no pressure, of course. Maybe you will, Amara replied, surprising herself with the implied promise. After they finished their entrees, Thorne insisted they try the restaurant's famous bourbon bread pudding. Life's too short to skip dessert, he declared, and Amara found she couldn't argue with his philosophy. As they shared the decadent dessert, Thorne asked her a question that caught her off guard. What scares you, Amara? She considered deflecting with a joke, but something in his earnest expression encouraged honesty. Vulnerability, she admitted. Losing control, depending on someone else and being disappointed. She took a small bite of the bread pudding, savoring its rich sweetness before continuing. After my parents died, I developed this intense need for self-sufficiency. The idea of needing someone, emotionally, practically in any way, terrifies me more than any physical danger could. Thorne nodded slowly. That makes sense, given what you've been through. For me, it's irrelevance. At her questioning look, he elaborated. The fear that my work, my perspectives, my presence in the world won't matter. That I'll observe but never truly connect or impact anything meaningful. Is that why you go to such dangerous places? To feel the impact? A thoughtful expression crossed his face. Maybe partly. I've never analyzed it quite that way. I've always said I go where the important stories are, but perhaps there's something in what you suggest. He smiled ruefully. My therapist would have a field day with that insight. You see a therapist? Amara asked, then immediately regretted the question, worried it sounded judgmental. But Thorne answered easily. Since the injury, yes, it would be foolish not to, given the trauma and life changes, but I probably should have started years ago, considering some of the things I've witnessed in conflict zones. He studied her face. Does that surprise you? A little, she admitted. You seem so at peace with everything. Peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the ability to remain centered within it, he said. At least that's what my therapist charges me $200 an hour to learn. His eyes crinkled with self-deprecating humor. Amara laughed, appreciating his candor. Their dessert finished, they lingered over the last of their wine, neither seeming eager to end the evening. When the check arrived, Amara reached for it decisively. My treat, as promised, she said, slipping her credit card into the leather folder before Thorne could protest. Outside the restaurant, the late summer evening was warm but pleasant, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the giant oak trees that lined the street. Amara had parked a block away, and Thorne insisted on accompanying her to her car. I like walking in the evenings, he said. Well, rolling, technically. As they moved along the sidewalk, Amara was again conscious of glances from passers-by, but found she cared less than she had during their coffee outing. Thorne was telling her about a photography series he wanted to pursue next, portraits of people who had changed careers after age 50, documenting their journeys of reinvention. There's something powerful about choosing a new path when society expects you to be settled, he explained. The courage that requires, the rediscovery of purpose. They reached Amara's car, a sleek black Audi that reflected her preference for understated elegance. As she unlocked it with her key fob, she turned to face Thorne, suddenly unsure of how to end the evening. He solved the dilemma by reaching for her hand just as he had after their coffee. This time, however, he gently pulled her a step closer, looking up at her with a question in his eyes. When she didn't pull away, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Amara, he said, his voice lower than usual. Would it be too forward to say I'd like to see you again? Perhaps this weekend, if you're free? The gesture was old-fashioned, romantic in a way that modern dating rarely was, and Amara felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, not just attraction, but a genuine connection that promised depth and meaning. Not too forward at all, she replied softly. I'd like that. Saturday? He suggested. I could cook for you at my place. Fair warning, I make an excellent pasta, but my kitchen is adapted for my needs, so it might look a bit different than what you're used to. The invitation to his home represented a step toward greater intimacy, and Amara felt a momentary hesitation. But looking into his earnest blue eyes, she found herself nodding. Saturday sounds perfect. His smile was radiant. I'll text you my address. 7 o'clock? 7 it is. Thorne released her hand slowly, his fingers trailing against hers. Drive safely, Amara. I'll be counting the hours until Saturday. As she drove home, the ghost of his kiss lingered on her skin, and Amara found herself doing something she hadn't done in ages, daydreaming about possibilities, about connection, about the unexpected joy of finding someone who saw her, truly saw her, in all her complexity. Saturday arrived with a clarity of purpose that surprised Amara. She spent the morning at the office catching up on work, the afternoon at her favorite boutique finding a hostess gift, settling on an artisanal olive oil after the saleswoman assured her it was appropriate, and precisely 45 minutes selecting her outfit, casual but not too casual, a silk blouse in copper tones paired with tailored black pants. At 6:58 p.m., she parked outside Thorne's address in Virginia Highland, an eclectic neighborhood of renovated bungalows and mature oak trees. His home was a single-story craftsman style with a newly constructed ramp elegantly integrated into the front porch design. The garden was well-maintained, with late summer flowers adding bursts of color along the walkway. Before she could reach the door, it opened to reveal Thorne, casually dressed in a gray Henley that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the defined muscles of his arms, a reminder that despite his disability, he was physically powerful above the waist. "Right on time," he said with a warm smile. "I would expect nothing less." "Occupational hazard," Amara replied, returning his smile. "Lawyers bill by the hour, after all." She followed him into a home that immediately felt welcoming, open and airy, with hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, and walls adorned with stunning photographs that she assumed were his work. The layout had clearly been modified for wheelchair accessibility, with wider doorways and lower countertops in the open kitchen visible from the entryway. "Your home is beautiful," she said sincerely, handing him the olive oil. "A small thank you for dinner." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Thorne said, examining the bottle with appreciation. "And perfect timing. We'll use it for the salad dressing." He gestured toward the living room. "Make yourself comfortable. Can I offer you a glass of wine? I have a nice Chianti breathing for dinner, but I also have white if you prefer." "Chianti sounds perfect." As Thorne wheeled into the kitchen to get their drinks, Amara wandered toward the wall of photographs. They were arranged chronologically, she realized, starting with black and white images of Colorado mountains that she guessed were from his early career, progressing through colorful markets in Morocco, Buddhist temples in Myanmar, and on to more recent work from conflict zones. What struck her most was how each photograph captured something essential about its subject: a fleeting emotion, a relationship, a moment of profound human experience. In one, a Syrian father cradled his daughter amid the rubble of their home, his face a study in despair and determination. In another, two elderly women in Cuba sat playing dominoes, their laughter almost audible through the image. "These are extraordinary," she said, as Thorne returned with 2 glasses of wine. "Thank you." He handed her a glass and clinked his gently against hers. "To sharing a meal and stories." Amara sipped the wine, appreciating its complexity. "Is this your most recent work?" she asked, gesturing to a series of photographs that appeared to be from his Healing Traditions project. "Some of it. The Japan images aren't printed yet." He paused beside a particularly striking photograph of a Mongolian shaman. "This series has been therapeutic for me, in a way, exploring how different cultures approach healing, physical, mental, spiritual. It's given me perspective on my own recovery process." There was a vulnerability in his admission that moved her. "Has your recovery been difficult?" she asked gently. Thorne considered the question thoughtfully. "Physically, yes, especially at first. The pain was significant, but the mental adjustment has been the greater challenge." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Come keep me company while I finish preparing dinner. I can talk and cook at the same time." Amara followed him into the spacious kitchen, noting how it had been customized: lower countertops, a stovetop with controls at the front, cabinet and refrigerator handles designed for easier grip. Everything was organized with efficient accessibility in mind. "I had the house renovated after the injury," Thorne explained, noting her observations. "It was actually a welcome distraction during rehab, designing a space that would work for my new reality." He moved to the refrigerator, removing a large bowl of salad greens. "My mother thought I should sell this place and buy something single-level from the start, but I've always loved craftsman architecture. Turns out with the right modifications, almost any space can be adapted." As he prepared their meal, Thorne moved with practiced efficiency, clearly comfortable in his adapted environment. Amara sat at the kitchen island, sipping her wine and watching as he finished a pasta sauce that filled the kitchen with the aroma of fresh herbs and garlic. "You mentioned the mental adjustment being the greater challenge," she prompted, genuinely curious about his experience. Thorne's hand stilled briefly over the pot he was stirring. "The hardest part was accepting that certain aspects of my independence were gone. I've spent my life traveling to remote places, often alone, relying on my physical capabilities to get the shot I needed. Climbing mountains, wading through rivers, hiking into villages with no roads." He resumed stirring. "Acknowledging that some of those things are now beyond my reach, that required a different kind of strength. Yet you still traveled to Bali and Japan for your work," Amara observed. A smile crossed his face. "Adaptability is the essence of human survival, isn't it? I've had to modify how I work, hiring local assistants sometimes, focusing more on portraits and less on landscapes that require difficult terrain access. But the core of what I do, connecting with people, capturing moments of humanity, that hasn't changed." He transferred the pasta into a serving bowl with a fluid motion that spoke of practice. "What about you?" he asked, looking up at her. "Have you faced situations that required that kind of fundamental adaptability?" Amara considered the question as Thorne assembled their salad using the olive oil she'd brought. "After my mother died," she said finally, "I had to adapt to being the only caregiver for my father while also trying to finish law school. It wasn't the same kind of physical challenge you've faced, but it required me to completely reorganize my life and identity." "That couldn't have been easy," Thorne said, his expression softening. "How old were you?" 25, second year of law school. I almost dropped out, but my father insisted I continue." She smiled at the memory. He was incredibly stubborn. Even as his body failed him, his mind remained sharp. He'd quiz me on case law from his hospital bed. Thorne nodded appreciatively. "He sounds remarkable, like his daughter." The compliment warmed her, and Amara found herself sharing more about those difficult years, the challenges of balancing her father's care with her studies, the isolation she'd felt as friends moved forward with their careers and relationships while her life revolved around hospitals and textbooks. "Dinner's ready," Thorne announced, placing the salad bowl next to the pasta. "Shall we move to the dining room?" The dining table was already set, with candles waiting to be lit and a freshly baked loaf of bread in the center. Amara moved to help carry the food, but Thorne had clearly perfected a system, balancing the serving dishes on a tray attached to his wheelchair. "I've got it," he assured her with a smile, "though you could light the candles, if you wouldn't mind." Over dinner, their conversation continued to deepen. Thorne told her more about his childhood in Colorado, how his father had taught him to fly fish and identify constellations, how his mother had encouraged his early interest in photography by converting a bathroom into a darkroom when he was 16. "What made you specialize in international law?" he asked as they enjoyed the pasta, which was indeed excellent, creamy but not heavy, with perfectly balanced flavors of basil and sun-dried tomatoes. "My mother's influence, partly," Amara replied. "She was involved in civil rights cases domestically, but she always emphasized that justice doesn't stop at borders." She took a sip of wine, savoring it. "And then during college I spent a semester in Beijing. It was eye-opening, seeing how a completely different legal system operates, how cultural values shape legal structures. I was fascinated by the challenge of building bridges between different systems." Thorne nodded. "We do similar work in a way. You bridge legal systems, I bridge cultural understandings through images." The observation struck Amara as insightful. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right." As they finished their meal and moved to the living room with fresh glasses of wine, Amara felt a comfortable intimacy developing between them. They sat close together on the sofa, Thorne having transferred from his wheelchair with a practiced motion that spoke of hard-won adaptability. "Tell me about your photography technique," Amara said, genuinely curious about his creative process. How do you know when you've found the right moment to capture? Thorne's face lit up at the question. It's intuitive, mostly. There's a feeling I get, a sense that something essential is about to reveal itself. He reached for a photography book on the coffee table, opening it to an image of a weathered fisherman casting a net at sunrise. See how the light catches his expression here? That momentary concentration, the unity of man with his environment? I can't plan that. I can only be present and ready when it happens. As he leaned closer to show her details in the photograph, Amara became intensely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of his skin, the warmth radiating from his body, the graceful movement of his hands as he turned pages. When he looked up, their faces were inches apart, and the conversation faltered as awareness shifted to something more elemental. "Amara," he said softly, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again, a question in them. In answer, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deepening as he responded, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. He tasted of wine and possibility, and something inside Amara that had been tightly coiled for years seemed to unfurl, reaching toward him like a plant toward sunlight. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Thorne rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I saw you waiting at that cafe," he admitted, his voice low. "Was it worth the wait?" she asked, surprising herself with the playfulness in her tone. His smile was slow and devastating. "Absolutely, though it raises an important question." "What's that?" "How soon I can kiss you again." This time, when their lips met, the kiss was more confident, an exploration of mutual desire and growing connection. Amara felt herself surrendering to the moment, to the unexpected joy of being with someone who seemed to understand her on a fundamental level despite their short acquaintance. Later, as the evening stretched into night, they sat talking with Amara's head resting comfortably against Thorne's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They spoke of travels they'd enjoyed, books that had shaped their thinking, dreams they still harbored. In those quiet hours of connection, Amara realized that something significant had shifted within her. A wall carefully constructed after her parents' deaths was beginning to crumble, allowing someone else to glimpse the private rooms of her heart. Over the next several weeks, Amara found herself in uncharted territory, a relationship developing with an intensity and ease that simultaneously thrilled and terrified her. She and Thorne fell into a rhythm of regular dinners, long conversations, and increasingly intimate moments that left her feeling both vulnerable and strangely fortified. "You seem different," Layla observed over their monthly lunch, studying Amara with suspicious interest. Her oldest friend since their undergraduate days at Spelman, Layla had an uncanny ability to read Amara's emotional state. "You've met someone." Amara's hesitation confirmed Layla's assumption. "His name is Thorne. Well, James, but everyone calls him Thorne. He's a photographer." "A photographer?" Layla's eyebrows shot up. "Not a lawyer or a banker or a consultant?" She ticked off the professions of Amara's previous boyfriends on her fingers. "Will wonders never cease?" "He's different," Amara admitted, picking at her salad. "Not just his profession. He uses a wheelchair, spinal cord injury from his work as a war photographer." Layla's expression softened. "You really like him?" It wasn't a question, but Amara answered anyway. "I do. He makes me see things differently. Not just the world, but myself." She looked up at her friend. "It's a little terrifying." "The best things usually are," Layla said wisely, reaching across the table to squeeze Amara's hand. "When do I get to meet him?" The opportunity came the following weekend at a gallery opening for a photography exhibition that included some of Thorne's work from his Healing Traditions series. Amara had invited Layla and her husband Marcus to join them, a step toward integrating Thorne into her small but close-knit social circle. The gallery was crowded, wine flowing freely as Atlanta's art enthusiasts mingled among the photographs. Thorne's images, displayed prominently on the main wall, drew consistent attention. Amara felt a surge of pride watching him speak with visitors about his work, his passion and insight evident even from across the room. "He's charismatic," Layla murmured, appearing at Amara's elbow with Marcus. "And talented," Marcus added, gesturing toward the photographs. "These are extraordinary." Amara led them toward Thorne, who had just finished speaking with an elderly couple. His face lit up when he saw her approaching with her friends, and the warm, intimate smile he directed at her made her heart skip. "Thorne, this is Layla and Marcus Davis," she introduced them. "My oldest friends." "The famous Layla," Thorne said warmly, extending his hand. "Amara speaks of you with great affection. And Marcus, I understand you're a jazz musician? Saxophone, right?" Marcus looked pleased. "That's right, though the corporate day job pays the bills." The conversation flowed easily, Thorne drawing out Marcus's thoughts on the Atlanta music scene and Layla's experiences as a pediatric surgeon. Amara marveled at how effortlessly he connected with people, his genuine interest in their lives creating instant rapport. "Your photographs are remarkable," Layla said, gesturing toward the display. "Especially this one." She indicated an image of an indigenous healer in Peru, her weathered hands sorting through medicinal herbs, her granddaughter watching intently beside her. "You can feel the knowledge being passed down." "That's exactly what I was trying to capture," Thorne said. "The continuity of wisdom across generations. That little girl will inherit not just techniques, but an entire worldview, a relationship with the natural environment." As the evening progressed, Amara found herself observing Thorne with new eyes, seeing him through her friend's perspective. His wheelchair seemed to fade into irrelevance as visitors engaged with him about his work, drawn to his intellect and passion rather than defined by his disability. Later, as they were leaving the gallery, Layla pulled Amara aside. "He's wonderful," she said simply. "And the way he looks at you." She shook her head, smiling. "Don't overthink this one, Amara. He's special." The validation from her most trusted friend settled something in Amara. That night, at Thorne's house, their physical relationship deepened beyond kissing for the first time. A beautiful, tender exploration that revealed new dimensions of connection. Thorne's body told its own story. The powerful upper torso developed from years of propelling his wheelchair, surgical scars mapping his journey of survival, the line of sensation that marked where feelings stopped midway down his torso. "You're beautiful," Amara whispered, tracing the contours of his chest. Thorne caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I need you to know," he said seriously, "that my injury affects certain physical responses, but not my ability to feel pleasure or to give it." His eyes held hers, vulnerable and honest. "There are adaptations, different approaches, but the essential connection, that's fully intact." The intimacy of his disclosure moved her deeply. "Show me," she whispered. And he did, with patience and creativity and profound tenderness, demonstrating that physical love could transcend conventional expectations. That connection existed in multiple dimensions beyond the merely corporeal. Afterwards, lying in the peaceful quiet of his bedroom, Amara felt a profound sense of having crossed a threshold, not just physically, but emotionally. The carefully constructed walls around her heart were crumbling stone by stone, and while part of her wanted to frantically rebuild them, a stronger part welcomed the demolition. "What are you thinking?" Thorne asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy," she admitted, "and that scares me a little." He didn't dismiss her fear or offer platitudes. "I understand," he said simply. "Joy can be as terrifying as pain when you've learned to protect yourself from both." The insight was so precise that tears unexpectedly pricked at her eyes. "How do you do that? See straight through to the heart of things?" "It's my job," he reminded her gently, observing, understanding, capturing truth. He kissed her temple. "And you, Amara Lewis, are the most fascinating subject I've ever studied." Their relationship continued to deepen in the weeks that followed, but not without challenges. Their differing schedules presented the first hurdle. Amara's work often required early mornings and late nights, especially when dealing with international clients in different time zones. Thorne's schedule was more flexible but included occasional trips for assignments that could last from a few days to several weeks. Then there were the practical considerations of navigating a relationship where one partner had physical limitations. Amara learned to research accessibility before suggesting restaurants or activities, discovered which movie theaters had the best accommodations for wheelchair users, and became adept at recognizing the subtle signs of fatigue that Thorne would never verbally acknowledge. For his part, Thorne never made her feel that these adaptations were burdensome. "You're not accommodating me," he told her once when she apologized for suggesting a restaurant that turned out to have a stepped entrance. "We're navigating the world together. Sometimes that means finding a different path." It was this perspective, his ability to frame challenges as opportunities for creative problem-solving rather than obstacles, that continually amazed her. She began to adopt it in her own life, finding that it transformed her approach to work difficulties and personal frustrations alike. The first major test of their relationship came when Thorne received an assignment to document indigenous healing practices in the Amazon rainforest, a 3-week expedition that would take him to remote areas with limited communication capabilities. "I can turn it down," he offered as they discussed it over dinner at her apartment. "There will be other assignments." Amara was touched by the offer but shook her head. "This is exactly the kind of work you're passionate about. Why would you turn it down?" Thorne reached across the table for her hand. "Because we're just finding our rhythm together. 3 weeks is a long time to be out of communication, especially this early in a relationship." The fact that he was considering her feelings so carefully only confirmed what Amara already knew, that this relationship mattered to him as much as it did to her. The realization gave her courage. "I think you should go," she said decisively. "Your work is part of who you are, and I would never want to diminish that." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right?" His smile was tender. "Mine couldn't possibly grow any fonder, but I appreciate the sentiment." In the days leading up to his departure, Amara noticed herself experiencing an anxiety that felt disproportionate. It wasn't just that she would miss him, though that was certainly true. There was something deeper, a fear that his absence would somehow break the spell, that what they had built together might prove fragile when tested by distance. The night before he left, as they lay together in her bed, she finally voiced her fear. "What if everything changes while you're gone?" Thorne propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with serious eyes. "Some things will change, that's inevitable. But the fundamental connection between us?" He shook his head. "That's not fragile, Amara. It's not dependent on daily contact or physical proximity." "How can you be so sure?" she whispered. "Because I've seen enough of life to recognize what's transient and what's lasting." He traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "What we have, it's built on something solid. Recognition, understanding, mutual respect. Those things don't evaporate over a few weeks apart." His certainty steadied her, and when she drove him to the airport the next morning, she found herself feeling more wistful than anxious. They said goodbye at security, where he kissed her with enough passion to draw curious glances from passers-by. "Take care of yourself out there," she said, fighting the urge to hold on to him a moment longer. "The rainforest is no joke. I've got the best guides and a team of experienced researchers," he assured her. "I'll be back before you know it, with stories and photographs to share." She watched him navigate security with practiced ease, noting how TSA agents treated him with respectful efficiency. As he was about to pass through the scanner, he turned and caught her eye one last time, blowing her a kiss with a smile that warmed her from within. That evening, returning to her apartment alone felt strangely disorienting. In just a few months, Thorn had become such an integral part of her life that his absence left a palpable void. She wandered restlessly through her rooms, finally settling in her home office to catch up on work emails. A notification on her phone caught her attention. Thorn had tagged her in a social media post from the airport in Miami, where he was catching his connecting flight to Brazil. The photo showed a stunning sunset through the terminal windows, and his caption read, "Last glimpse of a North American sunset before the adventure begins. Already missing Amara Lewis, who reminded me this morning what I'm coming home to." The simple acknowledgement of their connection, publicly declared, filled Amara with an unexpected happiness. She was still smiling when her phone rang, Layla calling to check in. "How are you holding up?" her friend asked. "First night of bachelor life again?" "It's strange," Amara admitted. "I got so used to having him around." "That's what happens when you let someone in," Layla said softly. "They create a space in your life that feels empty when they're gone." She paused. "It's a good sign, you know, that you miss him this much already." After they hung up, Amara sat quietly, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that chance encounter at airport security. She had gone from carefully maintained independence to a relationship that made her feel simultaneously more vulnerable and more secure than she had in years. As she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text. Thorn, sending one last message before his flight to Brazil. "Boarding now. Limited communication for the next few days as we travel upriver. Remember, distance is just physical geography. In all the ways that matter, I'm still right there with you. Sleep well, Amara." She held the phone to her heart for a moment, then typed a reply. "Safe travels. The world needs your perspective, your images. I'll be here when you return." She hesitated, then added words she hadn't yet spoken aloud. "I love you." Her finger hovered over the send button, fear and courage warring within her. Finally, taking a deep breath, she pressed send and watched the message deliver, carrying her heart across the distance between them. The first week of Thorn's absence passed in a blur of work for Amara. She threw herself into a complex international acquisition case, grateful for the distraction of 16-hour days and conference calls that spanned multiple time zones. But in quiet moments, her morning coffee ritual, the drive home in evening traffic, the stillness before sleep claimed her. His absence resonated with an intensity that surprised her. Thorn had warned her that communication would be limited once his team reached the more remote areas of the Amazon. The occasional text came through when they reached areas with satellite coverage, brief updates about their journey, fascinating details about the healers they were meeting, and always an expression of how much he missed her. 4 days into his trip, she received her first response to the "I love you" text she'd sent before his departure. Signal finally strong enough to properly respond. "I love you too, Amara. Have since that first coffee, the words feel like coming home." She read the message so many times she practically memorized it, the confirmation of his feelings both exhilarating and terrifying. When she'd sent those 3 words, there had been the safety of distance, the knowledge that an immediate response was impossible. Now that he had reciprocated, the reality of their deepening connection was undeniable. Layla, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in Amara during their weekly yoga class. "You told him, didn't you?" she asked as they rolled up their mats. "Told who what?" Amara deflected, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her. "Don't play dumb, counselor. You told Thorn you love him." Amara sighed in surrender, via text, like a coward. "Or like someone taking a brave first step in a way that felt manageable," Layla countered. "Did he say it back?" "He did." Amara couldn't suppress her smile. "And that terrifies you?" It wasn't a question. "Of course it does." Amara gathered her belongings, avoiding her friend's perceptive gaze. "Love means vulnerability, dependency, risk. It also means joy, partnership, and growth," Layla pointed out gently. "You've spent years building walls, Amara. It's okay to be scared when they start coming down, but don't mistake that fear for a warning sign. She squeezed Amara's shoulder. Some walls protect us, others just keep us isolated. Layla's words stayed with Amara in the days that followed, becoming a touchstone as she navigated her fear. She began a journal, something she hadn't done since college, documenting her thoughts and feelings about this evolving relationship and the transformations it was catalyzing within her. "I've spent so long building a life defined by self-sufficiency," she wrote one evening. "Independence became my religion after my parents died. The idea that someone else's presence or absence could affect my emotional state felt like a weakness to be overcome, not a natural part of human connection. But I'm beginning to understand that true strength isn't found in isolation. It's in the courage to reach toward another person despite knowing the risks." On day 12 of Thorne's expedition, when he'd been out of communication for nearly 4 days, Amara's phone lit up with a notification. He had managed to send a photograph, a stunning image of an elderly indigenous healer teaching his grandson how to prepare a medicinal bark. The composition captured the tenderness between them, the ancient knowledge passing from weathered hands to young ones, all set against the verdant backdrop of the rainforest. The message attached was brief. "Thought of you today when this grandfather spoke about legacy, how we live on through what we teach others and the love we share. Miss you. Should have satellite connection again in 3 days." Amara studied the photograph for a long time, touched by his ability to connect their relationship to his work thousands of miles away. She sent a response she knew he wouldn't receive until he reached the next area with coverage. "This image speaks volumes about connection and continuity. I see why this project matters so much to you. Be safe. Missing you more than I thought possible." The third week stretched Amara's patience to its limits. A minor political dispute had erupted in the region where Thorne was working, and though his team wasn't in the affected area, international news coverage of unrest in the Amazon sent her anxiety spiraling. She found herself checking news updates compulsively, calculating time differences, and staring at her phone, willing it to bring word from him. "This is exactly why I avoided serious relationships," she complained to Layla over emergency margaritas. "This awful, helpless feeling of caring about someone beyond your control or protection. It's intolerable." "Welcome to the human condition," Layla replied wryly. "The price of admission for deep connection is accepting uncertainty. There are no guarantees, Amara, not for any of us." When Thorne's text finally came through, "Heading back to civilization tomorrow. All safe, project successful. Cannot wait to see you." The relief nearly buckled Amara's knees. She realized with startling clarity that despite her lifelong quest for independence, her heart had made its own decision about Thorne. She loved him, and with that love came all the vulnerability she had spent years avoiding. The day of his return, Amara left work early for the first time in her career, ignoring the raised eyebrows of colleagues accustomed to her workaholism. She drove to the airport with butterflies in her stomach, feeling oddly like a teenager before a first date rather than an accomplished attorney in her 30s. She waited at the international arrivals gate, scanning each emerging passenger until she spotted him, tanned, beard slightly fuller than when he'd left, eyes lighting up when he saw her waiting. He wheeled himself toward her with purpose, and Amara found herself moving forward too, meeting him halfway. "Hi," she said simply, suddenly shy. "Hi yourself," he replied, his voice washing over her like a balm after 3 weeks of absence. She leaned down and he reached up, their kiss tender despite the public setting. When they broke apart, his hand lingered on her cheek. "I missed you," he said. "More than I have words to express, and words are my second language." "Show me your first language then," she challenged with a smile. Thorne reached into the bag hanging from his wheelchair and pulled out his camera. "May I?" Understanding his intention, Amara nodded. He raised the camera, adjusting settings with practiced fingers, and began photographing her, Not posed portraits, but candid moments. Her smile, her hand tucking hair behind her ear, her eyes watching him with affection. After a few minutes, he lowered the camera, a satisfied expression on his face. "Now I've captured what words can't say," he said softly. "How it feels to see you again after 3 weeks of carrying your image only in my memory." They collected his luggage and made their way to her car, Thorne recounting highlights of his expedition. He was energized despite the long journey, his passion for the project evident in every description. As they drove to his house, he showed her preview images on his camera's display, each one a masterful composition that told a story of healing traditions passed through generations. At his home, their reunion deepened into physical reconnection, tender at first and then urgent with the need to bridge the weeks of separation. Afterward, lying together in the peaceful quiet of his bedroom, Thorne traced patterns on Amara's bare shoulder, his touch gentle and reverent. "There's something I want to discuss with you," he said, his tone suddenly serious. Amara felt a flutter of anxiety. "That sounds ominous." "Not at all." He reached to the nightstand and retrieved a folder, handing it to her. "Actually, it's an invitation, or a proposal of sorts." Curious, Amara opened the folder to find information about a remote ecological reserve in Costa Rica. "What is this?" "Remember that photography series I mentioned, about people who reinvented their careers after 50? She nodded, and he continued. "The couple who founded this reserve are part of that project. He was a corporate attorney, actually, and she was an investment banker. They left those careers to create this conservation area and scientific research center. It looks beautiful," Amara said, examining photographs of lush rainforest and pristine beaches. "It is. I visited briefly between assignments last year." He took a deep breath. "They've invited me to come spend 2 months documenting the reserve and the conservation work they're doing. It would be next spring." "That's a wonderful opportunity," Amara said sincerely, though she felt a pang at the thought of a much longer separation than the one they'd just endured. "Here's the thing," Thorne continued, taking her hand. "I want you to consider coming with me. Not for the entire 2 months necessarily. I know that's not realistic with your work commitments, but perhaps for a few weeks?" Amara blinked, surprised. "You're asking me to join you in Costa Rica?" "Yes." His eyes held hers steadily. "More specifically, I'm asking you to consider what it would mean for us to share not just our lives here in Atlanta, but our broader worlds. My work takes me to extraordinary places, Amara. I don't want to experience them without you anymore." The invitation was unexpected, a doorway to a possibility she hadn't considered. Her immediate instinct was to list the practical obstacles: client obligations, court appearances, the impossibility of disconnecting from her practice for weeks at a time. But beneath that reflexive response was something else, a spark of excitement, of yearning for experiences beyond the carefully controlled parameters of her life. "I don't know if I can make that work," she said honestly. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," Thorne assured her. "Just for you to think about it, to imagine what it might be like for us to share that experience." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The reserve is fully accessible, by the way. They've done remarkable work ensuring people with mobility challenges can experience the rainforest canopy, the beaches, everything." That he had already considered the practical aspects of his disability in this invitation touched her deeply. It was so characteristic of him, addressing potential obstacles straightforwardly, without self-pity or embarrassment. "I'll think about it," she promised. Truly. Over dinner that evening, Thorne shared more stories from his Amazon expedition, the challenges of navigating remote waterways in his wheelchair, the extraordinary hospitality of indigenous communities they'd visited, the revelations about healing practices that had evolved over centuries of deep connection with the rainforest ecosystem. The most profound lesson, he told her, eyes alight with the passion that had first drawn her to him, was witnessing the interconnectedness of their world. There's no separation between physical health, mental well-being, spiritual practice, and environmental stewardship. It's all one integrated system. That's so different from our compartmentalized approach to health, Amara observed. Exactly, and it made me think about how we compartmentalize other aspects of life, too. He reached across the table for her hand. Work separate from personal fulfillment. Intellectual engagement distinct from emotional connection. Body divided from spirit. And you don't think it should be that way, she guessed. I think balance is possible. Integration. His thumb traced circles on her palm. These past weeks, immersed in that worldview, I've been reconsidering what matters most. What kind of life I want to build moving forward. Something in his tone made Amara's heart quicken. And what conclusions did you reach? His eyes met hers, clear and certain. That I want a life with you in it, Amara. Not just as someone I see between assignments or when our schedules align, as my partner, my companion, my fellow explorer in this one wild and precious life we've been given. The words hung in the air between them, a declaration more profound than, I love you, a vision of shared future that both exhilarated and terrified her. I want that too, she admitted softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I'm just not entirely sure how to build it. Thorne's smile was gentle, understanding. We figure it out together step by step, starting with Costa Rica, perhaps. As Amara drove home later that night, her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The practical attorney in her cataloged the obstacles to accepting Thorne's invitation, client commitments, the partner's expectations, her carefully constructed professional reputation. But another voice, one that had been quiet for too long, whispered of rainforest canopies, of breaking waves on pristine beaches, of the joy of sharing discoveries with the man who had so unexpectedly captured her heart. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to imagine a life defined not just by professional achievement and self-sufficiency, but by love, adventure, and the courage to step beyond comfortable boundaries. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that the step forward would change everything. The senior partners' conference room at Hargrove, Bennett and Associates, had always intimidated associates, but as a partner herself, Amara now sat at the gleaming mahogany table with the confidence of belonging. Still, as she presented her unprecedented request for a 3-week leave during the upcoming spring, she felt the weight of breaking with firm tradition. "Let me understand this correctly," Eleanor Bennett said, peering over her reading glasses. "You want to take nearly a month away, not for a client emergency, not for a family crisis, but for, what exactly? A vacation?" The word vacation carried the faintest note of disdain, as if Eleanor were referring to an incomprehensible frivolity. In the firm's culture, annual leave was something to be accumulated rather than used, a badge of dedication rather than a genuine benefit. "A working sabbatical," Amara corrected smoothly. "I'd maintain contact with key clients and be available for virtual consultations. The location has reliable internet access." She didn't mention that said location was a rainforest reserve in Costa Rica, or that her primary motivation was to accompany Thorne on his photography assignment. Richard Hargrove, the firm's founding partner, studied her with shrewd eyes. "This is unlike you, Amara. You haven't taken more than a long weekend in the 5 years since you made partner. Which is precisely why I believe this would be beneficial," she countered. "Burnout is real, even among partners. I've been operating at maximum capacity for years. A brief respite would allow me to return with renewed perspective and energy." The argument was strategic, appealing to the firm's ultimate concern, productivity and client retention. But as she made her case, Amara realized she genuinely believed what she was saying. The past months with Thorne had shown her glimpses of a more balanced existence, one where professional accomplishment existed alongside personal fulfillment rather than substituting for it. Eleanor and Richard exchanged glances, a silent communication born of decades working together. "We'll need a detailed transition plan for your active cases," Eleanor said finally, "and a clear protocol for how urgent matters will be handled in your absence." "Of course," Amara agreed, maintaining her professional demeanor while suppressing the urge to smile triumphantly. "I'll have it on your desk by the end of the week." As she gathered her materials, Richard added, "For what it's worth, Amara, I think this is a good decision. In my younger days, I was like you. All work, no boundaries. Nearly cost me my marriage." A wistful expression crossed his typically stoic face. "Some lessons you shouldn't have to learn the hard way." Leaving the conference room, Amara felt lighter than she had in weeks. The firm's conditional approval removed a significant barrier to joining Thorne in Costa Rica, but more importantly, it represented a small victory in her ongoing struggle to reshape her relationship with work, to see it as an important part of her life rather than its defining element. She texted Thorne immediately. "Meeting successful. Tentative green light for Costa Rica, pending paperwork and planning. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" His response came quickly. "Absolutely. My place at 7. I'll cook something special. So proud of you for asking for what you need." His words warmed her. Not just the affection they conveyed, but the recognition of what this step had cost her. Thorne consistently saw beneath her composed exterior to the internal struggles that shaped her choices, and his acknowledgement of her growth meant more than any professional accolade. That evening at Thorne's house, they celebrated with a bottle of champagne and his signature paella, a dish he'd perfected during an assignment in Spain years earlier. As they ate on his back patio, enjoying the mild autumn evening, Amara recounted the meeting with the senior partners. "I still can't believe I'm doing this," she admitted. 3 weeks away from the office? It's unprecedented. Yet completely reasonable by normal human standards, Thorne pointed out with gentle amusement. "Most people take vacations, Amara. It's not actually revolutionary. It is in law firm culture, especially at partner level." She took a sip of champagne, savoring the crisp bubbles. "But I'm starting to think our culture isn't particularly healthy." "No kidding," Thorne said wryly. "Though I'm hardly one to talk about work-life balance. Before my injury, I was known for disappearing into conflict zones for months at a time." "What changed?" Amara asked, genuinely curious. "Besides the physical limitations." Thorne considered the question thoughtfully. "Perspective, I suppose. When you come that close to death, it clarifies what matters." He set down his glass. "I still care deeply about my work, documenting human experiences, capturing moments of struggle and resilience, but I've realized that constantly bearing witness to others' lives meant I wasn't fully living my own." His words resonated with Amara. Hadn't she done something similar? Channeling all her energy into professional achievement, she'd become an observer of her own existence, going through the motions of living without full engagement, without risk, without the messy, unpredictable joy of deep connection. "That's changing now," she said softly. Thorne reached across the table, taking her hand. "For both of us." The weeks leading up to the Costa Rica trip were a whirlwind of preparation. For Amara, this meant meticulously organizing her professional responsibilities, creating detailed handover notes for colleagues who would cover her cases, scheduling video conferences with key clients to explain her temporary arrangement, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios that might arise in her absence. For Thorne, preparation was more practical, researching the reserve's facilities, corresponding with the founders about the focus of his photographic documentation, and ensuring his specialized equipment would function optimally in the tropical environment. "The humidity is the biggest challenge for the cameras," he explained one evening as they reviewed their preparations together. "And of course, navigating some of the paths in the wheelchair will be interesting. The reserve has accessible routes, but accessible in a rainforest context is relative." "Are you concerned?" Amara asked. realizing she hadn't considered the specific challenges his disability might present in such an environment. "Not concerned, just realistic," he replied. "I've worked in challenging environments since the injury. It requires more planning, more reliance on local assistance sometimes, but that's not necessarily a bad thing." His expression turned reflective. "Actually, it's been a valuable lesson in interdependence. Before, I prided myself on self-sufficiency, the lone photographer capturing the world on my terms. Now I understand that connection with others isn't a weakness. It's what makes meaningful work possible." The parallel to her own journey wasn't lost on Amara. She too had equated independence with strength, vulnerability with weakness. Thorne's perspective offered an alternative framework, one where seeking and accepting support became not a failure of self-sufficiency, but an affirmation of human connection. As the departure date approached, Amara found her anticipation mingled with anxiety, though not about the work she was leaving behind. Her concerns were more personal. 3 weeks of constant togetherness with Thorne would be their most sustained period of intimacy yet. What if the magic of their relationship existed partly because of the space between their separate lives? What if closer proximity revealed incompatibilities they hadn't yet discovered? She voiced these concerns during their weekly dinner with Layla and Marcus, who had become their most frequent social companions. "That's normal," Layla assured her. "Remember our first vacation together?" she asked, nudging Marcus. 3 days in and we were fighting about how to fold maps. "Paper maps," Marcus clarified with a laugh. "This was pre-GPS ubiquity. I maintained they should be refolded along the original lines. Layla crumpled them into submission." "The point is," Layla continued, "those little irritations and adjustments are part of growing together. They don't mean you're incompatible. They mean you're real people navigating intimacy. And communication is key," Marcus added. "When the map incident escalated into a full argument, it wasn't really about the maps. It was about me feeling like he was calling me careless, and him feeling like I didn't respect his orderly approach," Layla explained. "Once we talked about the actual feelings underneath, we could laugh about it." Their candor reassured Amara. This was what healthy relationships looked like. Not perfect compatibility, but willingness to work through differences with humor and honest communication. The night before their departure, Amara stayed at Thorne's house. As they finished packing their respective bags, the reality of their journey struck her anew. Until Thorne, her life had been a carefully controlled progression toward clearly defined goals. Now she was embracing uncertainty, stepping into experiences she couldn't fully predict or manage. "Second thoughts?" Thorne asked softly, noticing her pensive expression as she folded a light sweater for the cooler evening temperatures they might encounter. "Not about going," she clarified. "More reflections on how much has changed. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have recognized this version of myself. Taking extended leave, prioritizing a relationship, embarking on an adventure without a fully developed plan." Thorne wheeled closer, reaching for her hand. "And how does this new version of yourself feel?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh, "but also alive. More alive than I've felt in years." His eyes crinkled with understanding. Fear and aliveness often go hand in hand. The things that scare us are usually the things that matter most. "When did you get so wise?" she teased, leaning down to kiss him lightly. "Somewhere between getting blown up in Syria and falling in love with a brilliant attorney who helped me through airport security," he replied with a grin. "Life's funny that way." Later, lying beside him in the darkness, Amara found herself imagining the journey ahead, not just the physical travel to Costa Rica, but the deeper journey they were undertaking together. There would be challenges, certainly, moments of doubt, perhaps, but there would also be joy, discovery, growth. For the first time in her adult life, she was prioritizing connection over control, possibility over predictability. Dawn arrived with gentle rain tapping against the windows, a soothing rhythm that seemed to echo Amara's newfound sense of peace. They moved through their morning routine with practiced coordination. Thorne's adaptations for showering and dressing now familiar to her, their movements around each other in the kitchen a choreographed dance of comfortable intimacy. As they loaded their luggage into the car for the drive to the airport, Amara was struck by the symmetry of their journey, beginning where they had first met, at airport security, but this time embarking together rather than as strangers whose paths happened to cross. "Ready for the adventure?" Thorne asked, his eyes bright with anticipation as he transferred from his house chair to the car seat with practiced ease. Amara smiled, feeling a certainty that transcended her lingering fears. "Ready?" The airport was bustling with early morning travelers, business people in suits clutching coffee cups, families corralling excited children, couples heading for vacations or homecomings. As they navigated check-in and security, Amara found herself reflecting on how differently she experienced the world now, how her awareness had expanded to notice the myriad human stories unfolding around her, a perspective she'd gained from Thorne. At the security checkpoint, they were directed to the same lane where they had first met. The coincidence wasn't lost on either of them. "Full circle," Thorne murmured, glancing up at her with a smile that still made her heart skip. "Or the beginning of a new one," Amara suggested, returning his smile as she prepared to guide his wheelchair through the scanner. As they moved through security together, Amara caught sight of their reflection in a nearby glass partition, a striking woman guiding a wheelchair containing a man with kind eyes and a camera bag in his lap. 6 months ago, they had been strangers. Now they were partners embarking on a shared journey, their separate paths converging into one. At their gate, waiting to board their flight to San Jose, Thorne reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For saying yes. To Costa Rica, to us, to stepping into the unknown." His eyes held hers, filled with warmth and something deeper, a recognition of the courage it had taken for her to reach this point. "Thank you for asking," she replied softly, "for seeing possibilities in me that I couldn't see in myself." The boarding announcement interrupted their moment, calling for passengers needing additional assistance. Thorne squeezed her hand once more before releasing it to prepare for boarding. "That's our cue," he said with a grin, gesturing toward the gate. "Adventure awaits." And as they moved forward together toward the boarding lane, Amara felt the last pieces of her carefully constructed armor falling away, replaced by something stronger. The resilience that comes not from isolation, but from the courage to connect, to love, to journey side by side into an uncertain but promising future. Costa Rica welcomed them with a symphony of life, warm air heavy with humidity, the distant calls of howler monkeys echoing through verdant canopies, and a palette of greens so varied and vibrant that Amara found herself speechless as their van wound through the countryside from San Jose toward the Pacific coast. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Thorne said softly, noticing her wide-eyed wonder as she gazed out the window. "The sheer abundance of life. I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "It makes Atlanta's parks seem manufactured by comparison." The Sendero Reserve was nestled between the rainforest and the coast, a 1,000-acre sanctuary established to protect one of the region's last unbroken stretches of primary forest. As they approached the entrance, the van slowed to navigate a carefully maintained gravel road. A wooden sign carved with the reserve's name marked their arrival, the letters partially obscured by a flowering vine that seemed determined to reclaim this human declaration for nature. A woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair waited for them at the reception area, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile as their van pulled up. "You must be Thorne," she said as he maneuvered his wheelchair down the van's ramp. "I'm Elena Diaz. We've been so looking forward to your visit." Her accent carried hints of her native Argentina blended with what Amara guessed were years of American education. Elena's gaze shifted to Amara. "And you must be the brilliant attorney we've heard so much about." "Amara Lewis," she confirmed, extending her hand. "Thank you for allowing me to join Thorn for part of his assignment." "Any friend of Thorn's is welcome here," Elena said, her handshake firm and warm, "especially one who understands the complexities of international environmental law. My husband will be thrilled to talk shop with you. He still misses the intellectual challenges of legal work, though he'd never admit it." As Elena led them along a smooth, wheelchair-accessible path toward their accommodations, she explained the reserve's mission and structure. "We're trying to create a model of conservation that balances ecological preservation with sustainable human engagement," she explained. "The research center hosts scientists studying biodiversity. Our education programs connect local children with their environmental heritage, and the limited ecotourism helps fund it all." Their cabin was a marvel of thoughtful design, built on stilts among the trees with a wide ramp leading to a generous deck that offered panoramic views of the forest canopy. Inside, the space was both beautiful and practical, with accessible features subtly integrated into the overall aesthetic. Floor-to-ceiling windows brought the forest visually indoors, while ceiling fans stirred the air, keeping the humidity at bay without artificial cooling. "This is magnificent," Amara breathed, stepping onto the deck where a pair of scarlet macaws flew past at eye level, their brilliant feathers flashing in the afternoon sun. "Miguel, my husband, designed all our structures," Elena said with pride. "He wanted to prove that accessibility and sustainability could coexist with beauty. The cabin is solar-powered, and the water system collects and filters rainwater." After Elena left them to settle in, promising to send someone to guide them to dinner later, Amara and Thorn spent a moment simply absorbing their surroundings. The forest hummed with life, insects buzzing, birds calling, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze that moved through the canopy. "It's so loud," Amara observed with wonder, "but not in an urban way. It's like millions of conversations happening simultaneously." "That's exactly what it is," Thorn replied, his photographer's eye already assessing the changing afternoon light as it filtered through the leaves. Each species communicating in its own language. Warnings, mating calls, territorial declarations. "Do you wish we were staying in the same cabin?" Amara asked suddenly, gesturing toward the second smaller cabin visible through the trees where Thorn would be based after her departure. The question had been lingering since they'd confirmed the arrangements with Elena via email weeks earlier. Thorn considered her thoughtfully. "I'm grateful for these 3 weeks together," he said, "but I understand the value of your own space too, especially as you'll need to connect with your office occasionally." He reached for her hand. "This isn't a test of our relationship, Amara. There's no right or wrong way to do this." His understanding eased the concern she hadn't fully articulated even to herself, that somehow their separate accommodations might signal a lack of commitment or intimacy. Once again, Thorn demonstrated his remarkable ability to address her unspoken anxieties directly but gently. Dinner that evening was served in an open-air pavilion overlooking a small clearing where deer grazed at the forest's edge. They met Miguel Diaz, a robust man in his 60s whose formidable intellect was immediately apparent as he discussed the reserve's ongoing legal battles to protect its watershed from agricultural runoff. The corporations argue that their fertilizer use complies with national regulations, he explained to Amara, his former attorney's precision evident in his analysis. But those regulations haven't been updated to reflect current scientific understanding of how these chemicals affect aquatic ecosystems. "Sounds like you need updated environmental impact assessments as the basis for regulatory reform," Amara suggested, finding herself unexpectedly engaged in the legal puzzle. Miguel's eyes lit up. "Exactly. But convincing the courts to accept new scientific evidence when the existing regulations provide clear metrics, that's the challenge." As they continued their conversation, Thorne engaged with Elena about the healing traditions of the local indigenous communities, part of his ongoing documentation project. Amara noticed how naturally he drew people out, his genuine curiosity creating instant rapport. There's a healer in the nearby village who combines traditional plant knowledge with modern understanding of pharmacology, Elena was saying. Her grandmother was the community's medicine woman, but she herself went to university and became a biologist before returning to learn the traditional practices. That intersection of knowledge systems is exactly what interests me, Thorne replied eagerly. Would she be open to being photographed and interviewed? Later, walking back to their cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, Amara reflected on the evening. They're remarkable people. To leave successful careers and build something so meaningful. They're what I hope we might be in 20 years, Thorne said quietly. Still passionate, still growing, still creating something that matters. The casual inclusion of her in his long-term vision sent a pleasant shiver through Amara. 6 months ago, such an implication would have triggered anxiety, a need to establish boundaries and temper expectations. Now it felt right. Not a constraint, but a promise of continued shared adventure. Their first full day at the reserve began early, with bird calls serving as a more effective alarm than any electronic device. After breakfast in the pavilion with the Diazes and the reserve's small staff, Thorne prepared for his first day of photography while Amara planned to explore the accessible trails. "You're sure you don't mind starting separately?" Thorne asked as he packed his specialized camera equipment. "I need to capture the morning light in the research areas, but I could adjust my schedule." "I'm looking forward to some solo exploration," Amara assured him. "Besides, I brought work to review for Thursday's video conference." She hesitated, then added, "I'm still learning how to vacation properly." Thorne laughed. "Fair enough. Shall we meet for lunch? I should be finished with the morning shoot by then." The morning passed pleasantly for Amara as she hiked a moderate trail that led to a platform overlooking a river valley. The physical exertion felt good after days of travel, and the solitude gave her space to process the dramatic shift from her high-pressure Atlanta existence to this vibrant, unhurried environment. She found a bench on the platform and opened her laptop, intending to review client files, but found herself instead staring at the breathtaking vista before her. After a few minutes, she closed the computer without having read a single document. The work would wait. This moment, the play of light on the river, the distant call of monkeys, the gentle sway of the platform in the breeze, deserved her full attention. By the time she met Thorne for lunch, Amara felt more relaxed than she had in months. He was waiting at a small cafe on the reserve grounds, his face alight with the particular enthusiasm she'd come to recognize as his photographer's high. "You got good shots this morning," she observed, settling across from him. "Extraordinary ones," he confirmed. "The research team is documenting a newly identified orchid species. I captured the lead botanist examining it, her face reflecting both scientific precision and absolute wonder." He showed her the image on his camera's display, a middle-aged woman with a magnifying glass, her expression exactly as Thorne had described. "You have such a gift for capturing those moments," Amara said, genuinely impressed. "The precise second when human emotion is most transparent." "It's about patience," he replied, "waiting for the mask to drop, for the essence to reveal itself." His eyes held hers. "It's not so different from what you do in cross-examinations, looking for the moment when rehearsed answers give way to authentic response." The parallel surprised and pleased her. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right, though I'm usually seeking inconsistencies rather than emotional truth." "Different purpose, similar process," Thorne suggested. "We're both observers of human nature." The days fell into a pleasant rhythm, mornings often spent separately, Thorne working on his photography assignment, while Amara alternated between exploration, reading, and brief check-ins with her office. Afternoons and evenings they shared, sometimes with Thorn showing her his favorite discoveries from the morning's work, other times with both of them joining guided activities organized by the reserve. On their fourth day, they participated in a canopy tour, an adaptive zipline experience that the reserve had developed to be accessible for guests with mobility limitations. The system used a specially designed harness that secured Thorn safely while allowing him to experience the exhilaration of soaring between platforms built high in the ancient trees. Amara, initially nervous about the heights, found herself swept up in Thorn's infectious excitement. Watching him launch from the first platform, his face transformed with pure joy as he glided through the air, she felt a surge of emotion that caught her off guard. This was a side of him she hadn't fully witnessed in Atlanta. Uninhibited, playful, connected to a sense of physical freedom that his wheelchair might seem to contradict. "That was incredible!" he exclaimed when they both reached the second platform, his eyes bright with adrenaline. "Your turn next." As the days passed, Amara discovered aspects of Thorn she hadn't previously observed. His easy rapport with the local staff, his meticulous attention to his equipment, his occasional frustration when terrain limitations prevented him from capturing a particular angle he envisioned. She witnessed both his remarkable resilience and the moments when the constraints of his disability tested his patience. One afternoon, heavy rain had made a particular path too muddy for his wheelchair to navigate safely, preventing him from photographing a rare bird that had been spotted near the river. His disappointment was palpable, a flash of bitter humor crossing his face as he gestured toward his immobile legs. "Sometimes I forget until I remember," he said cryptically when Amara asked if he was all right. "Forget what?" she prompted gently. "The permanence of it." He looked toward the inaccessible path. "Most days I've adapted so well that the chair feels like an extension of me, not a limitation. Then something like this happens, and I remember. This is forever." The vulnerability in his admission moved her deeply. She realized that despite his remarkable adjustment to his injury, there were grief moments that still surfaced, not for her benefit or sympathy, but as part of his ongoing relationship with his changed body. "What would help right now?" she asked simply. He considered the question thoughtfully. Honestly? Not platitudes about finding another opportunity, not suggestions for alternative paths. A small smile softened his expression. Just your presence. Acknowledgement that it's okay to be disappointed sometimes without it negating all the positive adaptations. Amara nodded, settling beside him on a bench overlooking the river. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain create patterns on the water's surface. After a while, she felt his hand find hers, their fingers intertwining in quiet connection. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For not trying to fix it. For just being here." In that moment, Amara understood something fundamental about love that had eluded her in previous relationships. That true intimacy wasn't about having answers or solutions, but about being present through all of life's complexities, the disappointments as well as the triumphs. As the midpoint of Amara's stay approached, she found herself slipping into a natural rhythm unlike anything she'd experienced before. Mornings began with the chorus of forest awakening, birdsong and distant monkey calls filtering through the open windows of their cabin. Breakfast often included fresh tropical fruits she'd never tasted in Atlanta, served on the deck while watching toucans navigate the nearby trees. Days unfolded without the tyranny of her usual schedule, time measured by the shifting patterns of sunlight through the canopy rather than the relentless ping of email notifications. One afternoon, following a morning where she'd accompanied Thorn to photograph a local healer, Amara realized with a start that she hadn't checked her work email in nearly 48 hours. More surprising than this oversight was her lack of anxiety about it. The attorney who had once set hourly reminders to review her inbox was now content to let the digital world recede while she immersed herself in the vibrant reality around her. "You're different here," Thorn observed as they relaxed on their cabin's deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and purples. He was reviewing the day's photographs on his laptop, occasionally showing her particularly striking images. "Different how?" Amara asked, though she suspected she knew what he meant. "More present, less guarded?" His eyes met hers with gentle perceptiveness. "The first few days, I could see you mentally checking off tasks, maintaining your connection to Atlanta. Now you're fully here." Amara considered his observation. "It surprised me how quickly the urgency fell away," she admitted. "All those emails and calls that seemed so critical, most of them resolved themselves without my immediate intervention." "The great revelation of stepping off the hamster wheel," Thorne said with a smile. "The wheel keeps turning whether you're on it or not?" "That's both reassuring and slightly deflating to my professional ego," she laughed. "Your professional value isn't diminished by recognizing your human need for rest and perspective," he countered. "If anything, I'd argue it's enhanced." Thorne's words resonated with her, challenging the mindset that had dominated her career. The belief that constant availability and sacrifice of personal time were prerequisites for professional respect and advancement. Here in Costa Rica, she was discovering an alternative possibility. That balance might actually sharpen rather than dull her effectiveness. The next morning, they joined Miguel for a tour of the reserve's research facilities, where scientists from universities worldwide conducted studies on biodiversity, climate adaptation, and conservation. As Miguel explained their current projects, Amara found herself increasingly drawn to the legal frameworks supporting their work. "The challenge," Miguel explained as they observed a researcher cataloging butterfly species, "is that international protection for biodiversity doesn't always align with local economic pressures. We're constantly navigating between global conservation priorities and community needs. It's similar to the tensions in international business law," Amara noted, "balancing universal standards with cultural and economic realities on the ground." Miguel regarded her with interest. "Exactly. In fact, we've been trying to develop a more robust legal structure for our conservation partnerships. Perhaps you'd be willing to review some of our draft agreements during your stay? Purely voluntary, of course," he added quickly. The request sparked an unexpected enthusiasm in Amara. Here was an opportunity to apply her professional skills towards something meaningful beyond corporate profits, something aligned with values she was increasingly recognizing as important to her. "I'd be happy to help," she said sincerely. Later, as she and Thorne hiked one of the accessible trails through a section of old-growth forest, she shared her conversation with Miguel. "It feels different," she reflected. "The idea of using my legal expertise for conservation rather than corporate interest maximization." "Different how?" Thorne asked, navigating his all-terrain wheelchair over the carefully maintained path. The reserve had invested in trails designed to accommodate mobility devices without disturbing the natural environment, a challenging balance they'd achieved with impressive success. More aligned with, something deeper than professional accomplishment. She struggled to articulate the feeling. "When I'm drafting contracts for corporate mergers, I'm good at it, and it's intellectually stimulating, but it doesn't connect to anything beyond the transaction." Thorne nodded thoughtfully. "You're talking about purpose, work that contributes to something you genuinely value." "Yes, exactly." Amara paused beside a massive ceiba tree, its trunk wider than both of them combined, roots extending outward like ancient buttresses. "I've never really questioned whether I find meaning in my work before. Success was meaning enough. And now?" She traced the rough bark of the tree, feeling its solidity, its century-spanning presence. "Now I'm wondering if there's more I could be doing with my skills. If success could include impact beyond billable hours and partnership profit shares." The trail opened to a small clearing where a wooden platform extended over a ravine, offering spectacular views of the forest canopy and the distant Pacific Ocean. They paused there, absorbing the panorama in comfortable silence. "You know," Thorne said finally. "There are ways to integrate purpose into your existing career. Pro bono environmental work, advisory roles for conservation organizations. It doesn't have to be an either-or proposition." His words offered a bridge between her established life and these emerging values, a path that didn't require abandoning everything she'd built, but rather expanding it to encompass new dimensions of meaning. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, Amara felt a pang of awareness that her time at the reserve was more than halfway complete. In less than 2 weeks, she would return to Atlanta, to her cases and clients, to the structured existence she had crafted so carefully over the years. Thorne would remain for another 5 weeks, completing his documentation project. The thought of their impending separation created a hollow feeling in her chest. After 3 weeks of near-constant companionship, sharing meals, adventures, conversations late into the night, the prospect of returning to her solitary apartment felt less like a return to independence and more like a retreat to isolation. That evening, reviewing Miguel's conservation partnership agreements in their cabin while Thorne edited photographs, Amara found herself repeatedly distracted by thoughts of their approaching parting. The legal documents before her, normally the focus of her complete attention, couldn't compete with the emotions swirling beneath her professional concentration. "You're quiet tonight," Thorne observed, glancing up from his laptop. "Just thinking about leaving soon," she admitted. "It's coming up faster than I expected." Thorne saved his work and closed his computer, giving her his full attention. "Having second thoughts about your return date?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Was he asking if she wanted to extend her stay? Was that even possible with her work commitments? "I haven't let myself think about alternatives," she said carefully. "My agreement with the firm was for 3 weeks. But if you could stay longer? Hypothetically?" Amara set aside the documents she'd been reviewing. "Hypothetically? Yes, I'd stay longer." The admission felt vulnerable, an acknowledgement of how deeply this experience and this relationship had affected her. Thorne's expression softened. "The reserve has excellent internet connectivity. Your video conferences with clients would still be possible." "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that life sometimes offers unexpected forks in the road," he said, "and that the path you planned isn't necessarily the only valid one." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at their door, Elena bringing a folder of additional materials Miguel thought might be useful for Amara's review of the partnership agreements. After she departed, the moment had shifted, but the question remained suspended between them like an unopened possibility. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness listening to the symphony of nocturnal forest sounds, Thorne returned to their unfinished conversation. "I'm not asking you to upend your career or make dramatic declarations," he said softly. "I just want you to know that I cherish every day we have together here, and that if you wanted to stay longer, even just another week, I'd be overjoyed." Amara turned toward him, finding his outline in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. "Let me think about it," she said. "Really think about it, not just automatically default to what I previously planned." He kissed her gently. "That's all I ask." The next morning, Amara woke early and slipped out while Thorne was still sleeping. She made her way to the platform overlooking the ravine they had visited the previous day, needing space and solitude to process the decision before her. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds. In the valley below, mist clung to the treetops, creating an ethereal landscape that seemed to exist outside of ordinary time. A pair of scarlet macaws flew past, their brilliant colors a vivid streak against the dawn sky. Amara sat on a bench and closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel rather than think. What did she truly want, beneath the layers of obligation, habit, and expectation? The answer rose with surprising clarity. She wanted more time. More mornings waking beside Thorn, more discoveries in this extraordinary place, more opportunities to explore who she might be beyond the carefully constructed identity of attorney Amara Lewis, youngest partner at Hargrove, Bennett and Associates. Opening her eyes, she took out her phone, the first time she'd used it that morning, a small revolution in itself, and drafted an email to Eleanor Bennett. She explained that an unexpected opportunity had arisen to assist the Reserve with their international conservation agreements, providing valuable experience that could benefit the firm's developing environmental practice group. She requested an additional 2 weeks, promising continued availability for video consultations with her key clients. Before she could overthink it, she pressed send. Walking back to the cabin, Amara felt lighter, as if the decision had released a tension she hadn't fully recognized. Thorn was on the deck when she returned, nursing a cup of coffee and looking out at the forest with peaceful contentment. "Good morning," she said, joining him. "I just did something impulsive." His eyebrows rose with interest. "Should I be concerned?" "I emailed the firm requesting 2 more weeks here." She watched his expression shift from surprise to delight. "I told them I'd be working on the Reserve's conservation agreements, which isn't actually a lie. Miguel really could use the help." Thorn set down his coffee cup and reached for her hand. "What made you decide?" "I realized I've spent my entire adult life making choices based on what seemed responsible, practical, career-advancing," she said slowly. "Never based on what would bring me joy or connection or purpose beyond professional achievement." She squeezed his hand. "I want to experience more of this. Of us. Of this place. Of who I am when I'm here." His smile was radiant, crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way she had come to love. "I was prepared to miss you terribly while finishing this project," he admitted. "The thought of 2 more weeks together feels like an unexpected gift." "The firm might say no," she cautioned. "They might," he acknowledged. "But you asked. You chose possibility over certainty. That's the victory, regardless of their answer." As they sat together watching the forest come alive with morning activity, Amara marveled at the transformation in her thinking. 6 months ago, the very idea of extending a planned absence from work would have been unthinkable, a betrayal of her professional identity. Now it felt like an affirmation of a more complete self, one that valued professional accomplishment but recognized it as just one facet of a fully lived life. Eleanor's response came that evening, a brief message granting the extension with unexpected grace, noting only that she expected Amara would return with valuable insights for their newly forming environmental practice area. Reading it aloud to Thorn over dinner, Amara felt a wave of relief and excitement. 2 more weeks, she said, the reality of it settling in. "I can't believe they agreed so easily." "Perhaps they recognize that even dedicated attorneys benefit from new experiences and perspectives," Thorn suggested. "Or perhaps Eleanor has a secret romantic streak we never suspected." Amara laughed at the image of her stern, practical mentor harboring such sentiments. "Highly unlikely, but I'm grateful nonetheless." As they celebrated with a bottle of wine under the stars that night, Amara found herself thinking about the parallel paths that had led them to this moment, her journey from rigid self-sufficiency to embracing connection, his from physical wholeness to adapted resilience. Different challenges, similar outcomes, learning that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness to overcome, was the gateway to life's most profound experiences. The additional 2 weeks passed with a different quality than the first 3, a deeper immersion, a more profound letting go. Amara divided her time between exploring the reserve with Thorn, working on Miguel's conservation agreements, and maintaining her minimal professional obligations through occasional video conferences. The rhythm felt sustainable, balanced in a way her Atlanta life had never been. One evening, a week before her revised departure date, Amara found herself sitting with Elena on the main pavilion's deck, watching a spectacular thunderstorm roll in from the Pacific. Lightning illuminated the clouds in dramatic bursts, the distant rumble of thunder growing closer as the storm approached. "I used to hate storms," Elena remarked, sipping her tea. "In my banking days, they meant power outages, canceled meetings, disrupted schedules." "And now?" Amara asked, mesmerized by the lightning display. "Now, they're a reminder of what's real," Elena said simply. "Of forces larger and more enduring than quarterly projections or market fluctuations." She glanced at Amara with knowing eyes. "You've changed since you arrived, you know." "Is it that obvious?" "To someone who went through a similar transformation?" "Yes." Elena set down her cup. "When Miguel and I left our careers to build this place, our friends thought we were having midlife crises. Maybe we were. But sometimes a crisis is just clarity in disguise." The phrase resonated with Amara. "Clarity in disguise," she repeated softly. "That's exactly how this feels. Like I've been viewing my life through one lens, and suddenly there's another perspective available." "The question is what you'll do with that clarity when you return to Atlanta," Elena observed. "Integration is the hardest part, bringing the insights from this place back into your everyday reality." As the storm broke over them, rain drumming on the pavilion's roof and the scent of wet earth rising from the forest, Amara considered Elena's words. Integration, not abandonment of her career or a dramatic life overhaul, but a thoughtful incorporation of new values into her existing framework. It felt more achievable than the stark either-or propositions she had been unconsciously entertaining. Later that night, she discussed the conversation with Thorne as they lay listening to the continuing storm from the shelter of their cabin. "Elena's right about integration being the challenge," he said. "After my injury, I had to figure out how to integrate my new physical reality with my identity as a photographer. It wasn't about abandoning my work, but about finding new approaches, different perspectives." "What helped you with that process?" Amara asked, genuinely curious about his journey. Thorne was quiet for a moment, thoughtful in the darkness. "Patience with myself, primarily. Recognizing that integration isn't a single decision, but a series of adjustments, experiments, discoveries." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining, and having a clear sense of what mattered most, what core values I wasn't willing to compromise, even as external circumstances changed. "And what were those core values for you?" "Authenticity, connection to places, people, moments of genuine human experience, using my work to build bridges of understanding rather than walls of separation." He shifted to face her more directly. "What are yours, Amara? Beneath the professional achievements and self-reliance, what matters most to you?" The question hung in the quiet darkness, inviting introspection rather than demanding an immediate answer. Amara let herself sit with it, moving past the reflexive responses about excellence and independence to something deeper. "Justice," she said finally. "Not just legal justice, but rightness, balance, systems that serve human flourishing rather than constraining it." She paused, discovering her values as she articulated them. "Connection too, though I've denied its importance for years. And purpose beyond personal advancement. Those values don't require abandoning law," Thorne observed. "They might even be better served by your legal expertise, just channeled differently." His perspective offered a path forward that felt both challenging and achievable. Not a binary choice between career and relationship, between Atlanta and Costa Rica, but a thoughtful integration of all she was discovering about herself with the foundation she had already built. The next morning, Amara arranged a meeting with Miguel to discuss her work on the conservation agreements. They met in his small office at the research center, windows open to the sounds and scents of the forest. "These are excellent revisions," Miguel said, reviewing her annotated documents. "You've strengthened the protective provisions while maintaining flexibility for local implementation. Exactly what we needed. I've been thinking, Amara said, watching a hummingbird flit between flowers outside the window. The reserve could benefit from ongoing legal counsel for these partnerships. Not full-time, but regular consultation as new opportunities arise. Miguel looked up with interest. Are you proposing something specific? A formal advisory relationship, perhaps quarterly consultations to start, with availability for specific projects as needed. She met his gaze directly. I would offer reduced rates for the reserve, with the possibility of my firm developing a dedicated non-profit practice area if there's sufficient interest. That would be invaluable, Miguel admitted. But how would you manage it from Atlanta? These partnerships often require in-person relationship building. I'd need to visit regularly, Amara acknowledged, which aligns with my personal reasons for wanting to maintain a connection to the reserve. Miguel's eyes crinkled with understanding. Thorn, she confirmed. But also, this place, the work you're doing, the values it represents. Integration, Miguel said, surprising her with his insight. Elena mentioned your conversation. It's the path we chose too, not abandoning our professional expertise, but redirecting it toward purposes that resonated more deeply. As her departure date approached, Amara found herself increasingly contemplative about what awaited in Atlanta. She had emailed several of the firm's partners about her idea for developing environmental and conservation law as a practice area, receiving cautiously positive responses. She had spoken with Layla about her evolving perspective, finding unexpected support from her pragmatic friend. You don't sound like someone having a tropical romance-induced breakdown, Layla had observed during their video call. You sound like someone discovering aspects of yourself that were always there, just waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The night before her departure, the reserve staff organized a small farewell dinner. Seated beside Thorn at the long table in the pavilion, surrounded by people who had become friends over the past 5 weeks, Amara felt a bittersweet blend of gratitude for the experience and sadness at its conclusion. After dinner, Elena presented her with a small carved wooden box. A tradition for departing guests who have become family, she explained. Inside the box, Amara found a delicate necklace, a small piece of polished local hardwood suspended from a silver chain. The wood is from a 200-year-old tree that fell during last year's hurricane, Elena explained as Thorn fastened the necklace around Amara's neck. A reminder that even endings can hold beauty and purpose. Later, alone in their cabin for the last night, Amara and Thorn sat on the deck beneath a canopy of stars, the forest around them alive with nocturnal sounds. 5 weeks ago, I never could have imagined this, Amara said softly. How much this place would affect me. How much you would affect me. Life's most profound journeys are often the ones we don't plan, Thorn replied, his hand warm in hers, like helping a stranger through airport security. The reference to their first meeting made her smile. That seems so long ago now. And yet it was only 5 months. He shifted to face her more directly. Amara, I know we've avoided talking explicitly about what happens when you return to Atlanta tomorrow. I didn't want to pressure you or create artificial deadlines for decisions about us. I appreciate that, she said sincerely, but I want you to know where I stand. His eyes held hers steadily in the dim light. I love you. Being with you these past weeks has only deepened that feeling. When I return to Atlanta next month, I hope we can continue building what we've started here. Not just a relationship, but a shared vision for lives that encompass both our individual passions and our connection to each other. The simple directness of his declaration moved her deeply. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily now, without the fear that had accompanied her first text message weeks earlier. And yes, I want us to continue, not as a vacation romance or a temporary comfort, but as a real partnership. Even with the complications my disability sometimes creates? He asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. Your wheelchair isn't a complication, Thorn. It's part of you, just as your photographer's eye and your kindness and your frustrating habit of stealing all the covers at night. She smiled at his soft laugh. I love the whole person, not some idealized version without challenges. They stayed on the deck late into the night, planning practical next steps while leaving space for the organic evolution of their relationship. Thorn would remain in Costa Rica for 4 more weeks, completing his project. Upon his return to Atlanta, they would establish a rhythm of regular time together while maintaining their separate homes initially, a balance of connection and independence that honored both their need for togetherness and their established adult lives. Amara would explore developing the environmental practice area at her firm, using her growing relationship with the reserve as a foundation. If the partners weren't receptive, she would consider other options within the legal field that better aligned with her evolving values. It feels strange to be making such concrete plans in such a magical place, Amara observed as midnight approached, like trying to capture stardust in a spreadsheet. The magic isn't in the place, though, Thorn said, his expression thoughtful. It's in the openness we've cultivated here, the willingness to see beyond our usual boundaries, to embrace possibility rather than limitation. He gestured toward the star-filled sky. We can take that openness back with us. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the reserve were offering a perfect farewell image to carry home. Their parting at the small regional airport where Amara would catch her connecting flight to San Jose was tender but not tragic, tempered by the certainty of Thorn's return to Atlanta and the foundation they had established for their future. This isn't goodbye, Thorn said, holding her hands in his. It's just a brief intermission in our continuing story. 4 weeks, Amara confirmed, leaning down to kiss him one last time. 4 weeks. He echoed with a smile. I'll be counting the days. As her plane lifted off, Amara watched the forest canopy recede below, the vast green expanse giving way to mountains and eventually the Pacific coastline. She touched the wooden pendant at her throat, a tangible connection to the place and experiences that had transformed her understanding of what was possible. 5 months ago at Atlanta's airport, she had been a different woman, composed, controlled, contained within careful boundaries. She had seen a stranger struggling at security and made an impulsive decision to help him, never imagining how that single choice would ripple through her life, opening doors she hadn't known existed. Now, returning to the same city, she carried new perspectives, deeper values, broader possibilities. And in 4 weeks, the man who had catalyzed this transformation would follow, not just to continue their relationship, but to participate in the ongoing evolution of 2 lives that had unexpectedly, wonderfully, become intertwined. The plane banked eastward, toward Atlanta, toward home, but home had acquired a new definition now, not just a place or a career, but a connection, a partnership, a shared journey. As the landscape below gave way to clouds, Amara closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the full measure of her gratitude. For a chance encounter at airport security, for a black woman's simple kindness to a stranger in a wheelchair, for the unexpected joy of discovering that in helping another person find their way, she had ultimately found her own path forward. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.